Good to have you back here on Newsday. Thanks for staying tuned. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar says that Nigeria's ongoing voters registration will only be meaningful if backed by sweeping electoral and judicial reforms. Atiku is now a chieftain of the African Democratic Congress and warned that voter turnout has hit historic lows, with just 27% participation in the 2023 elections. He argued that flaws in BVAS, electronic transmission, and judicial interference have undermined confidence in the process. Now, he's proposing amendments to the Electoral Act, including mandatory electoral accreditation transmission and collation of results at all levels without manual alternatives. He also wants key electoral positions such as INEC chairman and resident commissioners subjected to democratic voting, and the burden of proving compliance shifted to INEC in election petitions. We have lawyer Malachy Ugummadu joining us now from Enugu to discuss Atiku's latest call for electoral reforms to ensure integrity and public confidence in the amendment of the electoral law. Good to have you with us this afternoon, Malachy. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. I predicted that you'll be the one on set. Good afternoon.
Well, that's great. Great to have you here. Could you give us your opinion on some of these proposed amendments that Atiku has made, and in general, what your thoughts on his statement and the timing as well?
Well, it is gratifying that the former Vice President of Nigeria, Alhaji Abubakar Atiku, has lent his voice to those proposals as reeled out in your intro. But they are not new, and those are not his personal views too, because all of what he said, starting from continuous registration, immediate and direct upload of the results to IRF, as well as the question of the citizens' participation, were all issues that were canvassed and articulated, so to speak, by so many election observers and civil society dedicated to election improvement soon after the general election. So they've been on the front burner. It is gratifying that a participant is now lending his voice to those concerns. But I think it goes without saying that we need to touch base and really improve on these identified areas of challenge. The entire credibility of the last general election was to evaporate when the story about glitches in uploading the result to the IRF became the dominant excuse by the election monitoring body, thereby depleting the confidence of the Nigerian people. And what made it worse was that whereas there was no problem whatsoever in relation to the National Assembly elections that took place simultaneously with the presidential election, the excuse could not properly sit well with the Nigerian people when that became an issue with respect to the presidential election. That, on the one hand, need to be tackled. The second point around that is that there's no way we can run away from IT at the moment. We can't run away from what technology can do and how we must limit human interference with the process of our recruitment or leadership recruitment processes. We must eliminate them, because that way we have had the kind of human inputs. And these are things that could ordinarily be handled through sophisticated infrastructures that are already in place and in use, other than the interference we witnessed then. And then the point about ensuring that all the processes of the elections, at all tiers and every level should be electronically done, dispensing with the manual interference or operations of the entire process. It's a welcome development. You cannot be accrediting electronically, and then the voting properly becomes manual. These are things that would be, that can easily be taken care of, handled faster, and results produced in good time. That kind of swift process, devoid of human interference, lends credibility. And when you talk of credibility, you're actually hitting the heart of the legitimacy of the results or the leadership that emerged from that process. But where you have all of these interferences, human infractions, and so on and so forth, you question the transparency of the process, and then people no longer own it, and they believe they didn't participate eventually in the process. All of these things impact negatively on the legitimacy of the government or the leadership that is enthroned through that process. So you could see that it goes without saying that the recommendations, so to speak, one has been in existence before Alhaji Atiku Abubakar lent his voice to those proposals. I mean, it does not detract from the weight that his own suggestions carry, but the point is very germane, very apt, and quite timely, that given what we have experienced in the last presidential elections, here is the time to take these proposals a lot more seriously and then incorporate them into the electoral reforms that we're all looking at leading up to the 2027 general election. I think that's the point to make.
Indeed, Malachy, it's always a pleasure to have you. Now, I want us to touch a little on the judicial process of the Electoral Act as well. Now, overvoting is, you would agree, is a recurrent challenge in Nigeria's electoral process, as it were. So how is this affecting litigants' ability to tender voter registrations or voter registers, BVAS machines, and polling unit results sheets in proving their cases during any election petition tribunal? And how proactive is the Electoral Act towards this?
Thank you for that very important question. And thanks again for dragging me back to it, because I noticed I left that out in my preliminary remarks. But here is the point, and we need to tackle it a lot more fundamentally. Leadership recruitment process must be a function of the participation, direct participation of the electorate. That is what is known as adult suffrage. In some cases, universal adult suffrage. Where at any time, the direct participation in the process of the leadership recruitment process is circumvented either by the process of litigation, which is a wonderful way of resolving human dispute and conflict, or electoral malpractices. At that point, you are no longer talking of democracy in the true philosophical sense of it, because democracy focuses on the people. So where the people are excluded, either by electoral malpractices or even some judicial interventions, then you're already having problems. So the first point I like to make is that it is by far more important that we redirect or re-engineer the process by which we guarantee that leadership emerge through electorate intervention, electorate participation. So that whereas we have at the moment overbearing judicialization of the process, the aim, the target, the goal should be to have the electorate decide leadership at the polling booths and not in the courts. If we put that aside, we go to the next question about where, however, disputation arises, which is very natural, very common, no less in election contestation. Election itself is a contestation. Where disputation arises, it is in the best interest of the electorates of Nigeria as a state, given the trajectory that we have all monitored, that the burden of proof of what had happened, particularly in relation to the victory secured by candidates, should be the burden of the election management body, and not the other way around, which is what we have at the moment, where losers, well, losers in parentheses, who probably were rigged out of the process, intimidated out of the process, and made to suffer one infraction or the other, now earn the additional burden of proving wrongly or proving rightly what the election management board did or did not do. That is double jeopardy as I see it. And I'm quite happy that in our deliberations in the last 1 week here in Enugu at the International Conference Center, the NBA has shown to be concerned and preoccupied with the processes that will guarantee the people's voice, the people's input, and the people's involvement and participation in the process, in the leadership recruitment process in Nigeria. And those are the areas that the electoral reform should focus on. When that happens, the burden of proof will shift on the election management body to say, this which has happened is our conclusion with respect to the process. And therefore, you will bear the burden rather than imposing it on the aggrieved party to begin to justify or repudiate what you have done. So, on both sides, I make the point that on the one hand, it is by far more important that we craft the process, we re-engineer the process in such a way that we don't go beyond the ballot box. Let the leadership recruitment process be such that will be credible, transparent, trustworthy, and one that inspires the acceptability and confidence of the people to accept it as the final result. That way, we dispense with human interference. It was my Lord Justice Chukwudifo Oputa, one of the great philosophers that found themselves in the bench, who once said that the Supreme Court is final, not because it is infallible, but it remains infallible because it is final. The purport of that expression is that they remain human beings superintending the affairs of the court, and they are not beyond reproach or mistakes. Therefore, if that were to be true, why would we not circumscribe and limit this recruitment process within and at the polling booth, where the voice, the will of the Nigerian people will reign supreme, rather than subjecting the collective aspiration of the Nigerian people to a panel of just 4 and at most 7, whose view may be at variance with the popular view of the... And this is not to say that we undermine the role of the judiciary. This is to say that there are technical instances, there are technical lapses, there are situations within the judicial system that can give rise to a very terrible situation.
Right.
You will remember what happened in, I remember Bayelsa State, I think in Katsina State, where an entire victory secured by a political party was completely thrown overboard on account of one technical lapse or the other. That cannot be the will of the people. And so I make those 2 points as my position with respect to your question.
Right. Very, very well said, Malachy. But given this tense political situation that we're in, the climate that we're in, how realistic is it for us to expect the National Assembly to assess or even pass some of these far-reaching reforms?
Well, first, I agree that they are far-reaching reforms. But secondly, I like to insist that there are no reforms that are willingly given as such. Cast your mind back at the reforms we have had in this country. They are all products of struggle. Never mind my word as a sympathizer of the labor movement. When I say the struggles, I mean they are preceded by concerted, properly conceived and nurtured massive campaigns. Some at very basic levels, but graduating and metamorphosing into a movement that leads to all of these reforms we have had. Is it in the Freedom of Information Act? That took a lot of, more than almost a decade to get that done. And that was by the civil society, and in particular some media organizations that were focused on freedom of information. Is it the PIB bill that is now an act? Is it the electoral reforms? These are all serious campaigns, serious reform programs, first conceived by people who have expertise in those areas and who are passionate in driving the process. Even the human rights that we're all enjoying today, if you go to the fundamental human rights enforcement procedure rules, 2009, you would see some revolutionary reforms around there. These are all campaigned by persons and groups and bodies. So the point I make there is that it's not so much about what the National Assembly thinks about. Don't forget, there are bills, categories of bills. It could be executive bills, it could be members' bill. So these bills can come from outside. I have sponsored a bill and pursued it up to a stage. The point I make, therefore, is that there are centers of agitations and campaigns beyond the National Assembly. Don't forget, they are now interested parties. And what we have seen is that whereas they may hear what the people want, they are constrained by their own entrenched interest, perhaps not to go as far as the people want. So it is a conflict. It is a clash between the desire of the people. When I say people now, I'm talking of the critical mass that are persuaded and are ready to push by the force of the conviction they have in those areas, vis-a-vis what the National Assembly may think about. And don't make any mistake about it.
Indeed.
When the will of the people is properly aggregated,
Indeed.
You may not be able to withstand it at any material time.
Indeed, Malachy Ugummadu, lawyer. Unfortunately, we just about run out of time. We'd like to thank you very much for your thoughts on the call for electoral and, of course, judicial reforms. Always a pleasure to have you.